Well,
So,
hi, welcome. I'm Rose Ann Fraser Ritchie, and I'm actually part of the events team of the Federation of Writers Scotland. Sempre, welcome everyone, especially to all our friends of Pskov, to the special event hosted by our Federation marker, Jim Mackintosh. Now, Jim wears many hats, including Poet-in-Chief of the Hampden Collection, Makar of the Catherine Eco Museum, poetry editor of the Nutmeg periodical, and program manager of the Hamish Matters Festival. Yay. But tonight, Jim is wearing one of his most important hats, that of the Honorary Cultural Ambassador of the Friends of Pskov. The Federation of Writers Scotland are really delighted to work in association with the Friends of Pskov to celebrate the anniversary of the official signing of the twinning agreement between Perth and Pskov on the 15th of March 1991. Now, I'll now hand you over to Jim, who will tell you all about the evening's exciting celebrations and introduce you to his wonderful guests. Vivat Nogo Beshera. Have a nice evening.
Well, thank you. I'm going to immediately hand over to Meg Luckins from the Friends of Pskov. I think you've got one or two things to say, Meg, and perhaps on behalf of the Provost and some other of our wonderful supporters of the Friends. So I'll let you speak first, and then I'll go on to all who's going to entertain you this evening.
Right, thanks very much, Jim. Yes, I've got a few words from, as you see from the headed paper, from the Provost, Dennis Malloy. I'll read them. Sally's going to read a few words from the Mayor of Pskov, Iliyana Nedkova, and then Tatyana Pustoshkina, who's here, is going to say a few words on behalf of the people in Pskov. So that will set the ball rolling. The Provost writes today, he starts off by saying that the 30 years is very important. Tonight is the celebration of the signing of the twinning here in Perth. And as we know, for the 30 years that we've been running the Friends of Pskov and the twinning arrangement, there's always been a councillor from Perth and Kinross Council, representative on the committee. And he starts by paying tribute to the last councillor, Henry Anderson, who sadly died in December from COVID-19. He struggled with it for a very short period of time, but sadly he died just after he had been online with you, Tatyana, and other people to celebrate the first memorandum signing, which Sally's going to come on to. So Dennis wants to thank Henry and his contribution, and to say, I know how much he enjoyed and valued the Friends of Pskov. He is missed by many. And then Provost goes on. In 1991, former Provost Alex Murray signed a twinning agreement with Pskov on behalf of Perth and Kinross Council. I've often wondered, he says, if those attending that signing would have realized that Pskov and Perth would still be holding hands today across the seas. When I took office as Provost 4 years ago, I had the pleasure of meeting the then Consul General, Andrei Pritsepov, several times and formed a lasting friendship. I took him on a short cultural tour of the city centre. We visited the theatre, concert hall, and our museum and gallery. He was very impressed by the quality of the history and culture that Perth offered within walking distance of each other, as there had been particularly close links between Pskov and Perth Theatre, as well as with Perth College in the fields of education and training. So the Provost loves the idea that it's all in one's hand, in the palm of one's hand. Pskov sprawls, Perth doesn't. Speaking, he goes on, at the annual Pskov dinner hosted by the Friends of Pskov at Perth College a couple of years ago, Andrei Pritsepov said, And it's these words that Dennis liked to leave us with tonight. Friendship between the people of Perth and Pskov is an example of relations based on mutual understanding and mutual respect. Benevolent contacts between people are essential. Between people are essential for successful relations between nations. We've always supported our joint initiatives of our two cities, whilst also contributing new, exciting concepts. And there we have the nub of tonight, a new, exciting concept. And Dennis finishes by saying these words from the Consul General say it all, and he endorses them wholeheartedly. So it's a lovely start to our evening. And Sally's going to take over from the Pskov point of view.
Good evening, everybody. I just would like to read to you a short letter from Iliyana Pustoshkina, who is the head of the city of Pskov, the equivalent of our mayor. And this letter was actually signed on the 4th of December last year. And sent to us. And the 4th of December was the date at which Alec Murray and the then head of city of Pskov signed the understanding to undertake a twinning agreement. So it was the precursor, if you like, to tonight's celebration. And I'm very happy to say that I have with me one of the people who went to that event, my husband, David. So he was there when it was signed. So this is a brief letter, but a very warm letter saying the 4th of December is an important date in the history of our twinning. On this day in 1990 in Pskov was signed an agreement of cooperation and development of friendly ties between the cities of Pskov in the then USSR and Perth in Scotland. The worldwide coronavirus pandemic had prevented us from personal meetings and traditionally celebrating this significant anniversary. We remember and appreciate the efforts of many people in Perth who have contributed to the partnership and created a solid foundation for its successful continuation. Taking this opportunity on behalf of the people of Pskov, I would like to convey words of gratitude to all the participants in twinned ties during this long time for their fidelity and respectful, trusting cooperation. I am confident that we will successfully overcome difficult times and maintain friendly ties for the benefit of future generations. A lovely warm letter, and we would thank Iliyana very much for that. And I think, like us, she is noting 30 remarkable years actually of meeting together, and it's just sad that we've not been able to celebrate this 30th anniversary person to person as well as people to people. But that's our letter from Pskov tonight, and greetings from the administration there.
Great, thank you, Sally. And now Tatyana Pustoshkina, could you add a few words of your own? Tatyana is the head of the International Relations Department in Pskov City Administration.
Dear friends, I want to thank all the organizers of this festival. It's a very significant event in the new history of our twinning city relations. It's very important that such an event begins with a poetry evening. Good deeds begin with good words. And this is what unites our people, our cultures, our cities. And I think this festival is another good deed for the people of Pskov and for the people of Perth. Thank you very much for all participants of this evening of tonight. And I look forward to real delight from Scottish and Russian poetry. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tatyana. We've had, these are the dignitaries now, Jim, but I'm looking at the screen and I'm noticing Andrew Hunter, who's sitting leisurely. He was in Pskov for a plein air, and I can see Olga Lawson Hello, Olga, one of our key supporters who lives in Coventry. So we are spreading the net even wider. So more and more people are getting to know about the Perth Pskov link. So over to you, Jim.
Thank you, Meg, and welcome everybody. It's difficult. It's different, not difficult. It can be, but I've just written down there, good deeds with good words. I think that's just a wonderful way of saying that. And I hope you're going to be entertained tonight. You don't want to hear too much from me. My first guest, I'll introduce everybody as we're going along, but essentially we'll have breaks for poetry and song and some discussions. But my first guest our first guest is Dr. Billy Kay, who's an award-winning writer and broadcaster and language activist. And I think that's a perfect description of that, is to defend language, Scots language, our own languages, whether that's across Russia and dialect as well. He was the 2019 Scots Media Person of the Year awardee. So, Billy, I can see you're there, so there is no hiding. There's no hiding now, Billy. Now, we could have this conversation in broad Scots, but I suspect no having the technology to put subtitles on it, we better kind of speak somewhere between Scots and English, I guess. And there'll be a bit of Russian, I suspect, as well. Billy, you're welcome. It's lovely to see you. Can you hear me okay?
Very good, very good. Очень хорошо. Спасибо большое.
You're welcome, Billy. Billy, I'm holding in my hands here. I'll do a bit of shameless plugging for you.
Good.
I'm holding in here a book called The Scottish World, A Journey into the Scottish Diaspora, which I have been doing as a bit of research. And I was fair taken with a particular paragraph on it. And my ancestry goes back a lot into, well, I have Irish, Scots, French, and English blood in me somewhere about there. And I've always thought most Scots, either the great migration was Ireland and Scotland and the great link was there. But I was fair taken in one of your earlier chapters in here about the forgotten diaspora, where you, and if I may read this little bit there, that where you talk about in the 1600s of so many boarding ships for Danzig or Gdansk, as was then known, that contemporaries reckoned there were between 20,000 and 60,000 Scots in the country at that time. And of course, from there into the Baltic states to Prussia and beyond in the 1600s. So the links between Scotland and Russia have gone back a long time. What can you tell us of where it all started?
Well, that quote there, a lot of boys literally took ship from Dundee and Aberdeen and Perth too. They would come along the Tay from Perth and head to the Baltic. And once there, a great example is Patrick Gordon. Patrick Gordon of Luchries, who's one of the great chroniclers of 17th century Russia. He started off in a seminary in Lithuania, fought for the Poles for a while, then moved east and then joined the Tsar and became Peter the Great's right-hand man. So there was this just general move to the Scots called it the Eastland trade, and that included Latvia, Lithuania, Russia, and all points east. There's a good quotation that I came across that I used. I made a series of programs on Scotland and Russia for the BBC, and that formed some of the material that's in the book. And there's a great quote here from the Scots magazine of 1739, which I think is relevant. We may surely be indulged to take a little rational pride in finding no action of consequence performed in which gentlemen of this nation are not in particular manner distinguished for their bravery and resolution. This is in Russia. At the head of the Russian fleet, we find a Gordon. In the highest rank of the army, a Keith. And Douglas, Leslie, and many more send their names from the extremities of that vast empire. Now, that's a great claim, but if you go and look at the map of Russia, it's proven to be correct, because in the far east of Russia, near Vladivostok, there's the Scott Peninsula and the village of Scotova, named after the Scott family, who are first mentioned in Patrick Gordon's diary. In the south, near Sevastopol, is the town of Sevastopol, which was started by Rear Admiral Thomas Mackenzie. And there's mountains there called Gora Mackenzie to the west of the city. In the west of Russia is Smolensk, which had 2 Scottish governors and commanders in the 17th century. And in the north, there's Archangel, whose culture in pre-revolutionary Russia was celebrated beautifully and captured by Evgeny Fraser in her great novel, The House by the Dvina, which I'll talk about later on. So there is a huge, huge influence there. It actually goes back to the mythical foundation of the Scottish nation, because in the Declaration of Arbroath from 1320, the great Declaration of Scottish Independence, it's mentioned that the origin of the Scots was in Greater Scythia. Now, Greater Scythia is the land north of the Black Sea, bordering the Caucasus. And that is where the Scots are supposed to have originated. And that's where St. Andrew preached. And that's why they reckon that St. Andrew became the patron saint of Scotland and Russia. Mm-hmm. And remarkably, and this is how history can repeat itself remarkably, for my series on the Declaration of Arbroath, I recorded a lady called Becky Wills, who's a historian who's worked on Russia. I'll talk about her book later on. And she and her family were hiking across the Caucasus Mountains in the border of Ossetia and Georgia in the former Russian Empire. And the border guards shouted them over and asked them in Russian where they came from. And Becky said, Shetlandia, Scotland. And because of that, they were invited to have a drink and share the food of the soldiers. And to Becky's astonishment, the soldiers started reciting the famous lines from the Declaration of Arbroath for as long as about 100 of us remain alive. And this was in the wildest part of the Caucasus Mountains. But the place where the Scots supposedly came from, mythically, and where the Declaration of Arbroath says that the legend of St. Andrew was where he preached. And that happened just a few years ago, in 2013, I think it was. So a remarkable thing. The first actual, well, 2 early appearances. First, probably hostile against the Russians, because the Scots took part in the Northern Crusade, which was a crusade by Western Christians against the Slav heathens. And that took place at the end of the 14th century. And the Scots took part in that. They got off to a very bad start because they fought with the English in Gdansk, Danzig. And one of their number, Douglas, one of their commanders, was actually killed by an Englishman there. And the Douglas Gate in Danzig, Gdansk, commemorates that event. But then they moved into the crusade against the Slavs. But the first direct mention we have of them supporting the Russians was in the 16th century, the middle of the 16th century, when they joined Russian forces against the Tatars in the Crimea. And an English general said something like, 2,000 Scots were better than 20,000 Russians at defeating the Tatars. But the reason for that was that the Scots had guns, had the new technology of guns at the time, whereas
that would help.
It helped greatly, whereas the Tatars didn't have bows and arrows. So, but that was about the first direct reference to the Scots being fighting for the Tsars, and that would build up during the 17th and 18th centuries.
Yeah, we were fighting for the Tsar. Is that because he paid more than anybody else, or we just had a propensity to be fighting? Is that the...
It was... we had a propensity for fighting, and there was no stigma attached to being a soldier of fortune. Patrick Gordon, whose 6 or 7 volume diary is one of the great sources, he was something like the 3rd son of the house and had to go abroad because he wasn't going to inherit. And that was the case with a lot of minor aristocrats. So they went and they became generals, and they became admirals, and they became part of that great Scottish migration. And in the 17th century, some notable figures. I interviewed the late great Tam Dalyell, Labour MP. Well, his ancestor, Tam Dalyell of the Bins, was called the Deil of Muscovy, the Devil of Muscovy. And he's famous for fighting with the Tsars, but also bringing back to Scotland the thumbscrew, the device of torture called the thumbscrew.
Well, some say poetry was the device of torture.
Yes, and I interviewed Tam Dalyell in the room in the Bins, where there was a portrait of his ancestor looking down upon us, which was remarkable. He was also supposed to have supped with the devil to Tam Dalyell of the Bins. But there were other ones, and there was a remarkable, there's a very flourishing Caledonian club in Moscow run by Dmitry Fedosov, a great Russian historian. And through him, I met a lady called Olga Leslie, who's written a history of the Leslies in Russia. And the Leslies, again, 17th century General Leslie, who fought for the Tsars at the Battle of Smolensk against the Poles. Then he came back to Scotland and he fought for the Royalists against the Covenanters in the middle of the 17th century. And at the Battle of Philip Hoch, he was captured by the Covenanters and he was going to be executed. But another Leslie who had fought with him in Russia, and that just shows you how fluid going back and forward was, another Leslie intervened on his behalf and got a pardon for him on condition that he would leave Scotland and never come back again. And he went to Russia, he took out Orthodox, he became an Orthodox devotee. He was made a devotee in the palace in the Kremlin, which was usually reserved for the royal family and people like that. And he became a great general in Russia. And his family became part of the elite in Russia. And Olga's, I think it was her great aunt and her great aunt, and I think her great grandmother were ladies in waiting for the Tsarina in 1917 when the revolution happened. So she's written a book about her family's history in Russia from the 17th century through to the present day.
Must seek that one out, actually. I think what it demonstrates for me is that although we're talking about trade and importantly the soldiers of fortune as well there, that what they were doing, of course, as it were, their prime purpose was that. But what they would also be taking them with them is the culture of Scotland with them. So they would be taking the song and the storytelling and the poetry, and I think they'd be meeting like minds because that's very much of the same traditions. And there's a lovely weave together of both cultures, I think, there, and it continues today. And
well, yeah, I know that Patrick Gordon was a very well-read and educated man and taught young Peter the Great and introduced, remarkably, books like Don Quixote by Cervantes. The first edition that appeared in Russia was owned by Patrick Gordon, and he passed it on to the young Tsar. I've got a good quote here by Patrick Gordon. When he first arrived in Russia, he wasn't too taken by the Russians, and he said the people being morose, avaricious, deceitful, false, insolent, and tyrannous when they have command, and being under command, submissive and even slavish, sloven and base. and yet overweening and valuing themselves above all other nations. So that was his first impression before he became the right-hand man of Peter the Great.
Now, I'll have to be careful how I say this, but because the chairman of the Friends of Willie Soutar is listening in here, but that could easily be our committee. Thank you, Billy. We'll come back. We've got lots more to talk about. I'm going to, hopefully my technicians in the background, we're going to have a little bit of entertainment just now. Hopefully it works. I'm going to introduce a couple of films. Debra Salem, who I think Debra's online, but Debra's recorded for us a couple of songs from an album that she has only released last year in amongst all this bourich that we're trying to get through. And it's an album of songs called In a Sma Room, inspired by the poems of William Soutar. So I'm hoping if I wheesh now and say not very much more, that it will start to play.
He who weeps for beauty gone hangs about his neck a stone, and he who mourns for his lost youth, he daily digs a grave for truth. And he who prays for happy hours tramples upon earthly flowers, and he who asks an oath from love and doth thereby his folly prove. So mourn not over much, nor stress after love or happiness. Mourn not over much, nor stress after love or happiness. Oh, he who weeps for beauty gone, he who weeps for beauty gone, and he who weeps for beauty gone stoops to pluck a flower of stone. Far in the night, one faint the moon, my love knocked at the door. He spake nae word as he walked in, and when they signed, stepped o'er. White was his face in the thin light, and white his hands and feet, like snow that in itself is bright, and white was his winding sheet, and white was his winding sheet. He looked on me with sickless een, and yet and all the joys that we had ta'en thronged up into my mind, and for the while he was near, glimmering in the gloom. I thought the halo of the world was there, say small in a small room. I thought the halo of the world was there, say small in a small room. Ooh, ooh, ooh,
Thank you, Deborah. I mean, this is the one thing that's missing from, yes, we can all just clap like that. It's a shame. It needs it. All the performing artists that are here this evening will recognise that kind of silence after something like that. It's difficult to get. That last song is particularly, I think, poignant, and for anybody that's sat or been lucky enough to be in Willie's room, as we call it, it's where Willie Soutar's house. It's a wonderful thing. I can just imagine that being sung there. It's a very poignant piece. That. Thank you to Deborah. Thank you. You're there somewhere. I'll just wave. I know you're there. And next up to entertain us. He may have gone away in the huff by now, since I was quite derogatory about the entire committee of which I am a member of the Friends of William Soutar. But my namesake is the chairman of such a noble body, and that is Iain Mackintosh. And Iain, I can see you there, Iain, so you haven't disappeared, is going to give us a rendition of a poem which I'll let you explain, which has connections to Pushkin himself, Iain. Now, Iain is the chair of the Friends. He's also the chair of the, or he's very much the man for the Perth Burns Club. So there's all sorts of connections. And every autumn, Iain tours Perthshire schools, with dragging me along recently as his apprentice and teaching Willie Soutar's Bairnrhymes to the youngsters in the P6s and 7s mostly. And then we have each school puts up its own champion. And then we have a final in Willie Soutar's room. And later on this evening, you're going to hear the poetry of two of our most recent Bairnrhymes champions. But for now, it's the most senior of Bairnrhyme champions. I'll hand you over to Iain Mackintosh. Iain, you're on.
Thanks, Jim. You never think he was my big brother, would you? I'm going to do a poem which Soutar wrote in 1936. I'll not go into Soutar's history very much, but he was confined to bed on medical advice in 1930. He was suffering from a condition known as ankylosing spondylitis, where the bones fused more or less from his feet and ankles up the way. And he was never to leave bed. He went into the bed in the Sma Room in 1930 and didn't leave it until his death in 1943. Early on, he was absolutely determined to make his mark in poetry. He read absolutely everything he could get his hands on, Scotland, England, right across the length and breadth of Europe. He was able to obtain translations of famous works, including those of Pushkin, of whom he was very fond indeed. And this poem is in praise of Pushkin. It's in Scots, and I'll read it in Scots, but before I do, I'll just give you a very brief summary of the plot. Pushkin is portrayed as working hard on his own work, but somehow or other not making the breakthrough. But one evening he's visited by an apparition, life dressed up in some form or other, who advises him that in order to make this breakthrough, he needs to steel himself, have the courage of the lion, and to be able to speak the truth. I think the fashionable phrase just now is to speak truth to power. And that's the substance basically of the poem. When it starts, Pushkin's knocking his head on the wall, not quite knowing what to do. By the end of it, he is the prophet. The poem's entitled The Prophet and subtitled Alexander Sergeyevich Pushkin. Time gaed by him, flocht on flocht. Nich kam ourum as he rocht, hameless on the hicks so thocht. In mirk, alane, with thorter poor, was it life's shape was stood afore to door him in a thoughtless hour, and laid a hand on him as licht as sleep, yet showed the scuddering light to walking up his eagle sicht. He kent the shape, and in life seen, saw the brick day and what had been, and what nae man had ever seen. Saw the brick day, and vively heard the green blade grammel frae the yard, the swithering word sang like a bird. Or life looked doon on him with ruth, and rubbed the fause tongue frae his mouth, and heft on him a tongue o' truth. Sign cleft him deep, and reaved the slicht heart frae its root, and in the nicht o' his bare breast set a live licht. He stood like in a yont o' thocht, where time gaed by him, flocht on flocht, glistering as the day upbrocht. Prophet, it was life's voice he heard. The world is wide, gang unfeared, and burn man's heart with a lowing word.
Thank you, Iain. It's a beautiful poem. It's not one that's heard very often. I don't think it's actually in. Is it in any of the publications that any of the?
It's in the Aitken collection, but it's not one of the ones that makes the shorter anthologies, you know, that go on the library shelves and into schools and stuff like that.
I think that was my chance basically to give a wee shameless plug here to this one here. I think is if anybody's wanting a good kind of starter for 10 on, it's quite a good one. The Into a Room, Selected Poems by William Soutar is quite a good starting point, I suppose, if you're wanting into that. Thank you very much, Iain. And I think I was going to come back to Billy now as well. I don't know if you're still there, Billy. Are you still on, yeah. Iain, as well? To me, the connections there with Pushkin probably takes us up into when we talked about Peter the Great there, and obviously then I'm thinking more on the kind of Catherine the Great, and we get into the era more of Pushkin himself, which is early 19th century. And I'm drawn, because I'm sort of pointing at Iain there, and Burns and Soutar, there was this kind of romanticism and drawing from, Iain mentioned there, you know, the prophet, and going back to, you know, fairy tales and goblins, and later on I'm going to read about devils and other rest of it. Sorry, I'm looking at you, Billy. They're just a kind of Russia in that time, and the links that we had then.
Yeah, the earlier, one of the main reasons why a lot of Scots went to Russia after the time of the middle of the 17th century and the soldiers of fortune was that there were Jacobites. And for example, Peter the Great's physician, Erskine, had been out in the 1715 rebellion and had to flee because he was a wanted man in Scotland. So he joined a coterie of Jacobites in St. Petersburg and in Moscow. And they were part of a strong group there. And there's a book by Becky Wills called The Jacobites in Russia, 1715 to 1750. And they tried to convince Peter the Great to stage an invasion of Scotland. That was unsuccessful, but they're commemorated in James Hogg, the poet's Jacobite Relics, his collection of poetry, because there's a line in one of the songs which is, "Here's a health to the mysterious Tsar, a hope he'll send us from far, to end the work begun by Mar." In other words, the leader of the Jacobite forces in the 1715. Coming into the Romantic era, the poems of Ossian, the poems of Burns, you mentioned in Perth Burns Club. When I studied Russian at Kilmarnock Academy and did higher Russian between 67 and 1969, and I went on a school trip to Russia. And in Leningrad, St. Petersburg, we visited the Dom Druzhba, the House of Friendship. And it had a whole room devoted to Robert Burns there. Burns was loved long before. A lot of people think it was because it was a man for all that, and his working class credentials, but he was popular in Russia long before that. And it was mainly due to the brilliance of the translator, Samuel Marshak, who did brilliant translations of Burns into Russian. As a child in Ayrshire, I vividly remember things like the visit of, I think it was Kosygin, one of the Russian leaders, came and visited the Burns country in the 1960s. And they always visited a place, there's a tiny hamlet near Galston where I come from, which is pronounced locally Moscow, but it's spelled M-O-S-C-O-W. And the number of Russians who go and visit Moscow and get their photograph taken beside the sign saying Moscow in the middle of an Ayrshire field is remarkable. And the locals have a great sense of humour because there's a wee burn runs through Moscow, and it's known locally as the Volga burn, this totty wee burn that runs through Moscow. But going into the Romantic era, Ossian, Burns, Walter Scott's Minstrelsy of the Scottish Border was very popular in Russia, and Pushkin translated the Twa Corbies into Russian. And the other great poet that I definitely want to mention, Lermontov. He's a couple of poems where he refers to his Scottish ancestry. His immigrant ancestor, Lermont, went from Russia to Poland, fought for the Poles, moved east, similar to Patrick Gordon, and eventually changed his name from Lermont to Lermontov. And in one of his poems, he imagines himself a raven flying back to Scotland to see his ancestral homeland. And they think that that comes from the Twa Corbies, from Pushkin's Twa Corbies, the image of the raven. But there's another poem which brings in Ossian. And I'd like to read it in Russian and Scots. In Russian, it goes, Под занавесью тумана, под небом бур среди степей, стоит могила Ossiana, в горах Шотландии моей. In Scots, in the corries of my Scotland, under a haar of cold mists, atween a lift of storms and dry suns, the grave of Ossian exists. And in English, in the mountains of my Scotland, under a curtain of cold mists, between the sky of storms and dry sands, the grave of Ossian exists. The Lermontov was fascinated by his Scottish ancestors. And there's a Scottish story even linked in with the end of Lermontov, because Lermontov died in a duel in the Caucasus near Piatigorsk. And the man who signed his death warrant was a man called Barclay, and he was a descendant of another great Scottish soldier, Prince Barclay de Tolly, who was one of the men who defeated Napoleon during the period of War and Peace. and he signed Lermontov's death warrant. And the place Lermontov died was called Shotlandka, or the Shotlandskaya Kolonia. And it was an area of the Caucasus that the Tsar had given something like 10,000 acres of land to the Edinburgh Missionary Society to attempt to plant Presbyterianism among the Muslim tribes of the Caucasus. They didn't quite succeed, but there's a remarkable ending to it, whereby a visitor from the Times newspaper, about 40 years after the decline of the colony lasted from about 1805 till 1830. But later on, a man from the Times newspaper goes there and discovers this reference to a Shotlandskaya Kolonia, a Scottish colony. And he decides to go and see if he can find anything about it, because he's no knowledge of it. And he asks the way to this village where the Shotlandskaya Kolonia was in the map. And he asks an old guy there who's dressed in Russian Orthodox clothes, coal black hair, coal black eyes. And he says in Russian if he knows of any Scotsmen in the district. And the guy says, why? And Mackenzie Wallace says, because I'm a Scotsman and I'd like to meet them. And this is how Mackenzie Wallace describes it. Let the reader imagine my astonishment when, in reply to this, the gentleman replied in genuine broad Scotch, "Old man, I'm a Scotsman too. My name's Joan Abercrombie. Did you never hear tell of the great Edinburgh doctor, Joan Abercrombie?" When I had recovered a little from my surprise, I ventured to remark to the enigmatic personage before me that though his tongue was certainly Scotch, his face was as certainly Circassian. "Weel, weel," he replied, evidently enjoying my look of mystification. "You're no forrang, I'm a Circassian Scotsman." This old gentleman had been bought out of slavery by the Scottish missionaries, educated, and became a leader of the community. And he travelled east into Siberia. And there's other stories. There's another story I collected from Paul Dukes, who's a great Russian historian at Aberdeen University, of another Scot going into a church in a remote place in Siberia and finding a priest there with the incest and sprinkling water in the kirk. And he looked fearsome, big, tall, red-headed man. And as he was doing this, the priest saw the look of kind of fear and trepidation in the visitor's face. And he says, "Dinna fash yourself, it's just a puckle water, it'll be in your hair." And again, this was probably a descendant of one of the people from the Scottish mission. And my ambition is to send a PhD student to find remnants of the Scottish dialect of the Caucasus.
Well, I would sign up for that. That would be. There should have been an extra round of applause for your Lermontov. Your Russian's is doing well, I think, Billy.
Well, it's rusty, but I've got a beautiful daughter-in-law called Olga Gruzina. And she tutors me when I'm about to do anything in Russian. And she reminds me of how it should be said properly. And she might even be watching us here. She's in Zurich along with my son, Ewan. My son, Ewan, studied Russian at Edinburgh University and hence lived in St. Petersburg and lived in Moscow and married a lovely Russian girl.
So you've got good tutors there then.
We do.
What struck me about that, though, was even though I didn't understand the Russian version of it, I could connect with it.
Yes.
And I actually felt more, and I'm not going to go straight into politics here, but I felt more passionate connection to that than I did the English version of it. It was like reading something out of that was just a piece of newspaper, whereas there was a rhythm and flow about the Russian version and the Scots version. And it's the same, and I'll probably get in trouble for saying this, but it's the same when I listen to somebody singing in the Gaelic, Scots Gaelic. I don't understand it, but it's got a beautiful resonance and tone about it.
Yes. One other art form that was very important for the Scots in Russia was architecture. Catherine the Great's architect was Charles Cameron, and he built some of the Cameron galleries at Tsarsky Selo outside St. Petersburg. And he put an advert in an Edinburgh newspaper, and he imported about 140 masons, their wives and families, to build his galleries in Tsarsky Selo. And they had a tremendous influence, apart from Cameron himself, who was Catherine's architect. They also, these people who come over, one of them was Adam Menelaus, who built some of the very unusual buildings at Tsarsky Selo. And another was the man who built the bridges in St. Petersburg using iron from the Karen Iron Works, because that was another thing that happened. Because of Admiral Gregg, the Scottish Admiral at Kronstadt, he imported, first of all, iron, and then iron workers to build up the Russian ability to produce iron. So a lot of the great churches in St. Petersburg, all of the great bridges are built by iron. And there was a saying, I'll see if I can find the actual saying for it, but Baird's Iron Work, one of the men from the Karen Company in Falkirk went out to Russia and built this iron work. And Baird's Iron Work had such a great reputation that there was a saying in Russia in the 19th century, when something was going great and going perfectly, it was something like "Как у Берду на заводе." It was going like Baird's Iron Works. It was perfect. Everything was going perfect. So that's another example of the tremendous depth of resonance that the Scots had.
I love the idea that, you know, when we look at, well, I have this odd obsession. You look at the kind of ironworks that you see on the road, you know, the drain covers, the condies, as we would call it, the condi covers, and you've got the Karen Ironworks, or the lozenge on the side. I love to think that all the bridges in St. Petersburg, all that grandeur, and then there's a wee stamp somewhere on each of these bridges that says "Made in Falkirk," you know. I think that's a lovely idea. There's probably a poem in there. I'm looking at John Glenday in the corner saying there's a poem there somewhere, John, I think. We're going to have another wee I think we need a song, and I'm looking to see if Iona's just about finished all our wee warm-ups there. Hello. I think I'm going to do a wee introduction and embarrass you a wee bit. Thank you for now, Billy. I'm going to do a wee bit of embarrassing introduction, Iona, but I'll let you do your own. I first met Iona at Hamish Matters Festival, where we celebrate Hamish Henderson's life every November. And this voice just filled Blairgowrie Town Hall, and it fell silent for every note that she placed in front of us. So I'm going to embarrass her by telling you further that she's a recording artist, a folk singer, was the Scots Singer of the Year in 2018. I think that's right. She's nodding. But recently, I think, even beyond all those great awards, she was successfully campaigning to get Spotify to recognise that Scots is a language which we all know anyway, but they didn't. And good on her for doing that, and more power to you for doing that. There's these wee victories are important, and my congratulations on that, Iona. So I'm going to hand you over to Iona Fyfe, who's going to hopefully give us a couple of songs. Iona.
Thank you. That was a lovely introduction. I'm really enjoying this so far. Although my face looks like I'm not enjoying it, because just earlier on I got Botox into my jaw, so look, I can't really smile properly. It's comfortable just to go like this, so we'll see how the singing goes. Russia is somewhere that I have always wanted to go to. I've always wanted to tour to Russia, and my mate's band got to go last year. I think they went to St. Petersburg for a gig, and they had a whale of a time, even though it was snowing. But Russia is on my list of I want to go there. But yeah, I thought that I would sing a song closer to home. And I'm from Aberdeenshire, so I'm from Aberdeenshire, and I live in Glasgow. But I'm part of something called the Traditional Music Forum. And it's a forum of lots of people from all over Scotland, and the place where we meet is Perth, to make it fair on the people coming from Inverness and the people coming from Aberdeen and the people coming from Glasgow and Edinburgh. And a few meetings ago before COVID, we met in Willie Soutar's house. I think it was the house that we went into, and we managed to have a meeting in there where we're struggling to find some place. And that was the first I've ever actually heard of William Soutar. And it was lovely to hear about him and learn a wee bit more about him. I'm not going to sing a William Soutar song. A few weeks ago, I got a call from a conservatoire in Paris saying, we want you to do some dialect coaching. We've got a classical music student, and he is doing a Benjamin Britten song cycle of William Soutar poems, and the student is struggling with the dialect. So I got to know some of his poems through that, but it was very interesting trying to teach a classical singer how I would sing something in Scots. So yeah, that was, but it just shows the appetite that people have all over the world for Scots language and Scots songs and Scots poetry. So I think I'm going to sing a song which mentions Perth. Just a flying mention. That's it. I don't have any songs that's actually, happens in Perth or anything. But this one is a lovely short one, and it's called Lonely in the Bothy, and it was written by, oh no, who was it written by? Canna mind. I'll let you know after the song. And it's not a bothy ballad. A bothy ballad is a song that was sung by farm labourers at the time of farming, or looking back on the time of farming, and it usually references stuff to do with the farm. But this one is just a lad moaning that he's lonely and he doesn't have a lassie to hug in the bothy. And the bothy was where single farm men would have to sleep, whereas a cotter house was where farm workers who were married got to sleep. So my great grandfather, he bade in a cotter house because he had a wife, but so he wasn't a single. So this one's called Lonely in the Bothy. Oh, when I get up to Yarda, there. Oh my goodness, I can't. I'm really nervous. I can't even remember the first line. That's really bad. Just goes to show that you can it just goes off your head. So I'm gonna, oh my goodness, right. Oh, when I get up to Yarda, well, the boss said me a clue. He canna back a tractor care till there isn't why he could clue. Therefore I got all the work to do that suited me just fine. And I bade in a little timmer bothy. Oh, the cowans they blow underneath my timmer bothy door. And the moosies they juking and hoot the knotholes in the floor. But that's nae the worst of being here. Discomforts I can thole, for it's lonely at night in the bothy. Well, I sort the money's fancy bulls and pit them out for Perth. And I'm the best showman that ever walked the earth. But fin all the judgings are we, and fin all the sellers won. It's back to my little timmer bothy. Oh, the cowans they blow in underneath my timmer bothy door. And the moosies they juking and hoot the knotholes in the floor. But that's nae the worst of being here. Discomforts I can thole, for it's lonely at night in the bothy. Well, I've nae wife to tie me down, say I'm on the loose. And ilka nicht I can be found at Waldy's public house. Mit you canna blame a man for taking comfort while he can, for it's a lonely at night in the bothy. Oh, the cowans they blowing underneath my timber bothy door, and the moosies lay juking and hoots the knot holes in the floor. But that's nae the worst o' being here, discomforts I can thole, for it's lonely at night in the bothy.
Hey.
And it was written by Charlie Allen, so I better no forget if I wrote that. Jim, will I pass back to you, or do you want another song I knew, or do you want some more later? Another rain? Aye. Well, Billy mentioned the Twa Corbies, and it's one of the ballads, and to be honest, I've never actually sung it before, but it's one of those ballads. I think it's a child ballad, and a child ballad is not for children. It was a collection of 305 ballads compiled by Harvard scholar Francis James Child, and he never left his office. He was an armchair scholar, and what happened was that folk wrote down the ballads and manuscripts and sent them out to Boston, and he decided, you know, what was the best version, what was the best ballad. So he compiled 305 ballads for all the world, but 91 out of 305 came from Aberdeenshire alone, which is really exciting, being from Aberdeenshire, that all these ballads came from this region. And you could leave your house and you could take a drive in the car and you could go to the place of the ballads and kind of sing the ballad there and get a feel for the ballad. But I'm going to be honest, I've never ever sung the Twa Corbies before. But I do have a version of it that I'm going to read and sing. But because Billy mentioned it, I thought that'd be great to sing it. So this is just off this. What is it? Off the hoof, the slit. What is it? The slit. What is it when you're like off the skin of your? I don't know. Anyway, I'm trying to explain what happens when you're not prepared and you're doing something on the hoof, off the hoof, the cuff of your hand. What's the analogy?
On your hoof.
Okay, right. Here's the Twa Corbies. As I was walking a lane, I heard Twa Corbies mocking me. Een and the tither say so. Far shall we gang and dine the day, oh. Far shall we gang and dine the day. In a hand Iona fell dyke, I what that's there lies at Newsley night. Nobody kens that he lies there, oh, but his hawk and hound and his lady fair, oh. His hawk and hound and his lady fair, oh. His hound is to the hunting game, his hawk to fetch the outfowl hame, his lady's ta'en another mate, oh. Say we can hear her dinner sweet, oh. We can hear her dinner sweet. You'll sit on his white to Spain, and I'll pick out his bonny blue in. We money all luck was Scotand hero. We'll seek her nest from it grouse barrow. We'll seek her nest from it grouse bear. There's money a name for him, Max Main, but none shall ken where he is gane. Or his white beans fan, they are bade, oh, the wind shall blow forevermore, oh, the wind shall blow forevermore. Right, cheers, thank you.
Iona, thank you, lovely. You survived the smiling bit, you survived, thank you very much. Well, now, not to offend you too much, Iona, but our next two performers are even younger than you are. So, yes. I mentioned earlier that Iain Mackintosh and I have the great pleasure every autumn of going round Perthshire schools and teaching and nurturing and spreading the word of Willie Soutar's Bairnrhyme. And every year we have to have a champion, but for me, every one of them that braves the challenge to remember a Soutar poem is a champion, and even more so to stand up in Willie Soutar's room, and where he wrote all these poems, you know, where he lay in a bed for 13 years and wrote, in amongst all that, the Bairnrhymes. So to stand up in there and perform one of his poems is an amazing feat. But we're very lucky this evening to have the two previous champions. Sadly, of course, 2020, we didn't have a competition, but I have with me the two previous to that, both of Viewlands Primary School then. They're about 100 years older than that now. And that is Ian Jordan and Chloe Mackay. And I would like to invite Ian Jordan to unmute, and then we'll hear from Chloe. But Ian, you're on, and you're going to give us a couple of renditions of a couple of your favourite poems. Are you there, Ian? Oh, you were there somewhere.
Hello.
Ah, Ian, you're welcome. You're on. The stage is yours.
Okay. So I'm going to do a poem called Scots Wi' Hay by Robert Burns. Scots wa hae we Wallace bled, Scots wan Bruce is aften led. Welcome to your gory bed, or tasteless victory. So, Scots wa hae we Wallace bled, Scots wan Bruce is aften led. Welcome to your gory bed, or to victory. Now's the day and now's the year. See the front, O battle lure. See approach proud Edward's power. Chains and slavery. War will be a traitor knave. War can fill a coward's grave. War say base as be a slave. Let them turn and flee. War for Scotland's king and law. Freedom's sword will strongly draw. Free man stand or free man fall. Let them follow me. Lay the proud used by oppression's woes and pains. By your sons in servile chains. We will drain our dearest veins, but they shall be free. Lay the proud usurpers low, tyrants fall in every foe, liberties with every blow, let us do or die.
Have you got another poem for us, Ian?
I do.
Ah, bro.
Right, I've got it. And this one is called Epistle to a Young Friend, and it's an extract by Robert Burns. A lang hae thought, me youthful friend, oh something to have sent you, though it should serve nae other end than just a kind memento. But how the subject theme may gang, let time and chance determine. Perhaps it might turn out a sang, perhaps turn out a sermon. You'll try the world soon, my lad, and Andrew dear, believe me, you'll find mankind an uncle squad and muckle they may grieve you. For care and trouble set your thought even when your end's attained, and all your views may come to naught. where every nerve is strained. I'll no say men are villains all, the real hardened, wicked, what hae nae check but human law, are too a few restricted. But mankind are unco weak and little to be trusted. If self the wavering balance shake, it's rarely right adjusted. Yet they wha fa in fortune's strife, their fate we should nae censor, for still the important end of life they equally may answer. A man may hae an honest heart, though poor teeth hourly stare him. A man may tack a neighbour's bed, though poor teeth yet hae nae cash to spare him. I free off han your story tell when we a bosom crony, but still keep something to yoursel ye scarcely tell to ony. Conceal yoursel as well as you can frae critical dissection, but keek through every other man we sharpened, sly inspection. This sacred law of real placed love, luxuriantly indulge it, but never tempt the illicit rove, though Nathan should divulge it. I waive the quantum o' the sin, the hazard of concealing, but it hardens all within and petrifies the feeling. To catch Dame Fortune's golden smile, assiduous wait upon her, and gather gear by every wile, that's justified by honour, not for to hide it in a hedge, nor for a train attendant, but for the glorious privilege of being independent. Adieu, dear amiable youth, your heart can ne'er be wanting. May prudence, fortitude, and truth erect your brow undaunting. In ploughman's phrase, God send you speed still daily to grow wiser, and may ye ever reck the reed and ever did the adviser.
Thank you, Iain. I'm glad to see you're getting there. You've got the Makar's bonnet on now. You see, a good Makar needs a bonnet. So you're getting there. Just keep going, and you can maybe hear this shield one of the days as well, you know. So that would be grand. And well, thank you very much, Iain. And now to a young poet who's going to perform for us another couple of poems from her repertoire, and that's Chloe Mackay. Now, Chloe, as I said, because last year Iain and I didn't get around the schools, she is our current Bairnrhyme champion. She gets a 2-year tenure in the post of champion. So I'd like to introduce you to the current William Soutar Bairnrhyme champion, Chloe Mackay. Are you there, Chloe? You're on the stage. It's yours.
The Wind by William Soutar. Wha wouldna be me a caper and flee, and hae care for onybody. I rug the forest be the hair, I swell the water, I bend the rock, I shog the steeple and make a mock. O turret and tour, castle was trembling when I looked poor. Wha wouldna be me a caper and flee, and hae care for onybody. A man o' the wind, say frisky and free, say supple and swack. But alack and alack, I am blind, I am blind. Address to a Haggis by Robert Burns. For fire on a sonsy face, great chieftain o' the puddin race, I bin the ma ye attack your place, penge, stripe, or derm. Will I ye worthy, o grace, as lang's my arm. The groaning trenches there you fill, your herders like a distant hill, your pin would help to mend a mill in time o' need, will through your pores the dews distill, like amber bead. His knife, see rustic labour dight, and cut ye up where eddies slight, trenching your gushing entails bright, like honey dight. And then oh, what a glorious sight, warm reeking rich. Then horn for horn they stretch and strive, they'll tack the highmost on they drive, till their wee belly kites alive are bent like drums. And Algie's man, mislike to ride, bethank it hums. Is there that all his French ragout, or only all the store stew, or fricassee with Makar spew, with perfect scorner, looks doon with sneering, scornful view, on sick a dinner. Per devil, see him, o'er his trash, as freckless as a widowed dash, his spinkled shank a gid whiplash, his kneves in it, the bloody for a fear to dash. Oh, how unfit. But mark, the rustic haggis fed, the trembling earth resounds his tread, clapping his welly knees a blade, he'll mak it whistle, and legs and arms and heats whisned, like taps of bristle. Now your power what mak man, kind o' caring, just the moot wi' billow fair. I'll Scotland once nae skinking where that jumps and luggies. But if you wish, her grateful prayer, gie her a haggis.
Chloe, thank you very much. Absolutely wonderful. Absolutely. It fills my heart with joy to hear young folk screeving away and speaking away in Scots poetry. It's just, I think the futures, we're in safe hands. We can all retire soon. Billy, do you agree? Do you think is the future good? Is the future bright?
I think it is, as long as we keep it going. But I ken Iona is involved in a project called Uur Vice, which is trying to get status for Scots, an act for Scots, and that's an important thing that we'll have to get a hint, I think, because I think ultimately we need some definite recognition, not just wee things here and there. We need Scotland to recognise its other mother tongue, its other national language, with the same status of Gaelic. Yeah. On that subject, just another wee Russian connection with Scots and Gaelic, in fact. 3 of the Tsars had Scottish nannies, and a famous one was a woman called Jenny Lyon, who was the nanny of Duke Nicholas, who became Tsar Nicholas, and she spoke broad Scots. And because of her influence, the Tsar's children and the royal family in Russia, when they spoke English, were said to have spoken with a Scottish accent. And this was carried on by another nanny, and the last nanny who was Scottish was Catherine McKinnon. She was nanny to Alexander II, and she was a Gael. I think she came from Mull originally. And she's said to have taught the Tsar's children some Gaelic words. But that's reported in several places that when they spoke English, the royal family, that was over about an 80-year period, had a distinctive Scottish accent, which is a lovely one to remember. Another wee literary reference, seeing we're celebrating the great writers. In Tolstoy's great novel, War and Peace, the doctor, who's called Villiers in War and Peace, is based on Sir James Wiley, who was the archiator, the chief medical officer in the middle of the 19th century. And he, for example, some of the great battles that the Russians fought against Napoleon, he was supposed to have carried out 200 operations at the Battle of Borodino. And he appears as a character in Tolstoy's War and Peace. So there's a strong literary element, even when it's underground and people don't know it that much.
Yeah, it strikes me, and sometimes I may be wrong here, but it strikes me that the Scottish influences, all of which you've talked about, that many people in Scotland are probably not actually aware of any of that, and in some ways we forget of our own culture and don't celebrate it sufficiently, to the point where you say we have lost the fact that Scots is actually a language in its own right.
Well, for a lot of people, that's the case, yeah.
Yeah, and I get we need bigger statements. We need the campaign like Our Vice. We need that campaign at government level to recognise that Scots isn't just for Burns night, and we're fine enough in Burns night and Burns suppers and all, but that's fine. And I guess the wee things that Iain Mackintosh and I do, I'll tell you a wee story there, and I think that gives me a wee bit brightness and hope for the thing is, I was at one of the primary schools a couple of years ago, and it was a primary sixes, and we do a wee introduction about who Willie Soutar is and what's it all about. And then, of course, the next thing we say is, and of course, we're going to learn poetry in Scots. And you say to the kids, to the bairns, does everybody know what Scots is? And you normally hate to go on and then describe and tell, but a wee hand goes up at the front of this row, a wee blonde-haired lass, P6 Abernethy. Yes, it's a language, Mr. Mackintosh. And I felt I was telt, that was it. And but the hand was still up. And the teacher said, she's got another question, Mr. Mackintosh. And I said, yes, what is it? She says, I thought you'd have kent that.
And so you should.
And well, you know what, I thought, yeah, that's me being telt. And when I tell that, for me, it gives me hope that at P6, and then when you hear Ian and Chloe, and not just having done the Bairnrhymes with us, but have kept it going, you know, and are now doing their own performances 2 or 3 years later and still going strong. I think anyway, I'm here to tell you, for you to tell us stuff, not for me to chunter on with stories.
Have you got room for an amazing story about the house by the Divina?
Yes, please.
Well, Iliyana Fraser was half Russian, half Scottish. Mother's family were for a well-to-do merchant family in Broughty Ferry, next to Dundee, and over to Dundee to learn the language and to learn the trade came a young Russian from Archangel, and he met Eugenia's mother, and they got married and they went to Archangel. And Eugenia describes, and I've got this on tape, it's a beautiful story, describes her mother arriving in the middle of winter in Archangel and taking a sledge, probably from the train, to the house by the Divina. And as she turns the corner into the street on the sledge, where the house by the Divina is, on the summer house, top of the summer house, is a lion rampant flag. And she's excited by this, and she says to her husband, look what's there. And he says, yes, it's there to welcome a Scottish bride. And that's a lovely story. But if you read The House by the Divina, it plays a role later on during the time of the Revolution, where bourgeois families like Eugenia's could be taken out and shot at a moment's notice by the Bolshevik soldiers. And literally, Jenny, as a teenage girl, comes home one night and the soldiers are rampaging through the house. And one of the soldiers picks up a big kist and puts it on the table, and they're raking out pots and jewellery and various things. And at the bottom of the kist, a soldier pulls out the lion rampant flag. And they look at it for a minute and says, right, we'll just take it anyway. And Eugenia's mum, Jenny, interrupts and said, you cannot have that. And everybody stops dead, astonished by this young woman defying the Bolshevik soldiers. You cannot have that. That is the flag of my country. And for a minute, there's total silence, people wondering what will happen. And she literally doors them out. stares at him. And he bursts out laughing and says, "This is a brave one we've got here, boys. We'll leave her our flag." And they go away, take the kiss, but leave the lion rampant with her. And the way Eugenie describes it is round the samovar, having a cup of tea later on, the babushka, the grandmother, says, "Jenny, you are extremely foolish. We could have suffered terribly because of your action just now." And Eugenie says, "Yeah, it was terrible what she did, but absolutely magnificent what she did." And she says, "I, who often favoured my Russian side, at that moment I was a Scot through and through." And it was a fantastic story of defiance by a Dundee lassie, and Dundee lassies can be quite strong characters, defying Russian soldiers.
Wonderful, absolutely wonderful. We're going to have a wee well, quite a bit of a premiere, I guess, but and we'll come back. Thank you, Billy. We've got time for another couple of questions later on, just before we but for now, I'm looking to, well, what's on my top left, sitting just on my shoulder here is Natalia. What we've got for you now is, and Natalia will do a little bit of her own introduction, but what we have is Pushkin's poem Devils, which Natalia you can introduce and read in the Russian original, and I'm going to then have a go at a Scots translation of it. So we'll see what kind of burach that ends up in. But Natalia, you're very welcome. The floor is yours.
Thanks so much. Thank you, everyone, to having me today. And it's such a lovely evening which we're making together. So it's a pure joy. What I wanted to say about Moscow, yes, I've been there, and I got a picture like Moscow. This is the sign Moscow. So it was something like that. Something weird. But anyway, yeah, it's a great story. When we went to Kelburn, to Ayrshire, as a festival, music festival, folk music festival with my husband and a couple of our friends, we decided to pop up to Moscow. Yeah, it's a kind of significant place for us, and yeah, it was very funny to compare the size with the real Moscow. So I'm the actor myself, and been living here in Scotland I think 8 or 9 years. Today I'm going to read the poem which is called Devils, or I suggest, I don't know what Jim you're thinking about it, but I suggest another, maybe even more precise title, which is Evil Spirits, because Pushkin has another poem which is called Devil, and not kind of mess up with it, because Devil, I believe it's a kind of single strength in itself, but the evil spirits should come together to reach this level of power, and that's what Pushkin describes in a poem. The poem was written in 1830 in Boldina, and actually Pushkin started to write it in 1829 in the winter time. That's why it's a snowstorm involved, and finalized in Boldina. Actually, I started this period of Pushkin work at school as a Boldina autumn, which is the most profound, I can say, the most fruitful period of his time. And we could ask why. Actually, Pushkin got engaged with Natalia Goncharova in 1830 and got more responsibility, like the future head of family. And he went to Boldina, which is his estate, to inherit the village. and he's stuck there because of the quarantine of cholera. And it was kind of several of zones, which reminds me a bit of the current time, to be honest. It's like, several of zones from Boldino to Moscow, and Pushkin could not come back to Moscow. And actually, especially the 1830, I'm just wondering what he felt from his letter. We could say probably the uncertainty, the fear, the devastation, the frustration, because he was stuck in the estate and all over the place. The cholera developed, which went to Moscow. And to be honest with you, I found a lot of parallel with the current time. This poem is not, it does not have a happy end, to be honest with you, but Pushkin in this particular period wrote, just about finalized the absolutely fantastic poem Yevgeny Onegin, and wrote the several fairy tales and another poem. So I believe, I hope, I don't know, to be honest, but I hope that Pushkin found this sense of exception himself in this period of quarantine, you know, and found the inspiration for him and creativity. And I'm really wish all of you guys in the current time to keep this, to find or keep this sense. So now I would try to read it by heart, but anyway, it's not really matter. I think the words, it's matter. Мчатся тучи, вьются тучи, невидимкая луна освещает снег летучий, мутно небо, ночь мутна. Еду в чистом поле, колокольчик динь-динь-динь. Страшно поневоле средь неведомых равнин. Эй, пошел ямщик, нет мочи, коням барин тяжело. Вьюга мне слепает очи, все дороги занесло. Хоть убей, следа не видно, сбились мы. Что делать нам? В поле бес нас крутит, видно, да кружит по сторонам. Посмотри, вон играет, дует, плюет на меня. Вон теперь во враг толкает одичалого коня. Там верстою небывалый он торчал передо мной. Там сверкнул он искрой малой и пропал во тьме пустой. Мчатся тучи, вьются тучи, невидимкая луна освещает снег летучий. Мутно небо, ночь мутна. Сил нам нет, кружится доля. Колокольчик вдруг умолк, кони встали. Кто там в поле? Кто их знает, пень или волк? Вьюга злится, вьюга плачет. Кони чуткие храпят. Вот ж он далеч скачет, лишь глаза во мгле горят. Кони снова понеслись, и колокольчик динь-динь-динь. Вижу, духи собрались средь белеющих равнин. Бесконечные, безобразные, в мутной месяце игре закружились бесы разные, будто листья в ноябре. Сколько их! Куда их гонят? Что так жалобно поют? Домового ли хоронят? Ведьму ли замуж отдают? Мчатся тучи, вьются тучи. Невидимкая луна освещает снег летучий. Мутное небо, ночь мутна. Мчатся бесы, рой за роем, в беспредельной вышине, визгом жалобным и воем, надрывая сердце мне. That's it. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for your interest in the Russian poetry. Thank you.
No, thank you, Natalia. Thank you very much. And yes, so the second part of that was is me. It's
fascinating. I do apologize to interrupt you, but I'm fascinating, to be honest, the translation. Your translation in Scots language, I'm sure it would be fascinating. Thank you.
You're welcome. I hope it is. It's a difficult thing. Anybody that's involved with translating poetry or the work, you have to almost. Well, I'm not going to go on too much about this, but you have to read not just the translation of it. It's about understanding where the writer was coming from. So the first point I did was to go back and read all of Pushkin's short stories again. Well, maybe not all of them, but a good chunk of them over the last 3 weeks, just to get my head into where he was coming from. There are certain kind of links to Burns. There are certain links to Willie Soutar in terms of that romanticism that we talked about, and also his use of devils and spirits. And you said that, not just devils, but the spirits, evil, good spirits, good spirits. So I'll here go at my translation on it, or as we would say in Scots, an hour setting. An hour setting of Pushkin's poem Deals, or Devils, or Hornies is another grand word for broad word for Scots for devils or evil spirits. So you can call this piece, this poem, either the Deals or Hornies, or Aiblin's maybe kind of a bit of both, so I shall bash on. Storm clouds hummel, storm clouds flichter, blazing snow and all is burning sae bricht by the moon was forms gathering tichter. Here och the heavens, here och the necht, hurling on our carriage clatters, yon tolling bell was sick a deathly ding, aboon the ostrich matters, a flegsome sound in its ring. Oh, fester coachie a canny sir a regret oor cuddy sir their fair pechen, and blind it for a is moichie set, smoor though sae deep, oor day verrachen, sir I'm obliged to speak with honesty. I've wandered a ticky, I've lost the way. What can we do whiles a deal steers us in about this gloaming grey? There, see, he's fiddling with far look at glee, jigging and birling in my way. Here deek into the gully she, heaving the breast o' the panicking bay. Now in front this humphy mickle hell, creeping for it sick a midden croon, come it by me, a nip at wind sae snell, sperking, melting under the lichtless moon. The storm clouds hummel, storm clouds flichter, blazing snow and all is burning sae bricht by the moon was forms gathering tichter, roch the heavens, roch the necht. We cannae thole this ony mair a cry than a sudden hush. The bell becalmed, the cuddies halted, mon fit new gangs awry, a stump Aiblin's a horny bedamned. Blizzards blowing, blizzards howling, cuddies snorting sair, grip it with fear, there the horny shaddy scowling with fire in his een, sick a gurry jeer, the cuddies wheel about, hooves a clatter, kirk bell rattles out its deathly sang, sick a fearsome sicht aboon the scatter, deals with the deed holes where we'll a belong. And the hornies their cells swirling, in the moonlight's hurkled glare, jigging and chanting and hooching and birling afore the burning leaves turn to fiery snow. What a feckless thrang, whaur's it they gang? What's the unwailing lament I hear? Is it prayer for the deed or a meringue? Aiblin's a union of witches I fear. The storm clouds hummel, storm clouds flichter, Blazing snow and aws burning sae bricht by the moon was forms gathering tichter and rock the heavens and a rock the nicht. A stam aghast, a horny swell in the galliard, louping in the pit market goukstorm. The clatter of hooves drumming hard, until my heart is rent o' love no yet born. So that's my humble. Well, I do a bow. There's no pressure when you've got some of the best speakers of Scots language sitting staring at you over your wee computer screen. It's no pressure. I hope I got that over. You get the idea what he was. It's basically, I think you get the idea what it's about. So, so thank you for that, and thank you, Natalia. A wave again.
Thank you, Jim. It was beautiful. So I did not understand some of the words, of course, because
neither did I. No, we'll.
It was fascinating following you because I know the original text, the text, the script, and yeah.
Well, we'll have some more adventures soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're not too bad. We're running over just a wee bit, but we started a bit late. So if you'll bear with us, hopefully you'll still manage to get to the last bus home. We're a wee bit more of a reflective point now. Meg mentioned earlier Councillor Henry Anderson. One of the last events I was at was at the dinner at Perth College, the Friends of Pskov dinner. And after that, I did a couple of things, really. I did a thing in St John's Kirk and managed to read a poem in the same spot about where John Knox had stood. And so all the next 12 months after that were probably because I did that. But sadly, I sat at the table with Henry and his wife, and we embraced and shook hands in the car park and said we looked forward to brighter times over the winter and into summer because we were going to be doing all these things at the end of last year. And it's just a fair scunner, as we would say. Sadness that Henry's no longer with us, and he passed away in December. And round about the same time, a friend of mine, the actor Andy Gray, who's a Perth man as well, died. And I was working with Perth Theatre at the time, and I wrote a wee thing which was a toast to absent friends, and it went out on Hogmanay and went all around the world. And it's basically a tribute to everybody that's kind of looked after us through this. A good word for it is Burach, this tragic Burach that we've all endured and still are enduring. But when I wrote this, I very much had Henry Anderson, our good friend Henry, and my good friend Andy Gray in mind. And I'm looking to the technology corner, who are now going to play you the film poem that I did along with Caris Watt and Dave McFarlane. So bear with it. It was written for Hogmanay, so there's a wee drama involved, but the sentiment is just the same. Jennifer, and I'll leave it to you.
Should old acquaintance be forgot and ne'er brought them in? No, they shouldn't. Nor should we forget the doctors and the nurses in Abbey and the NHS who've cared for us, who've sacrificed willingly for us. Nor should we forget all the folk who've kept the lights on, the water running, the heating on, the shelves stacked for us, on furloughed hours, 0 hours, nae hours, those biding alone, those in the streets alone, those wanting Scotland to be their home, Abbey just wanting life to be a wee ticket easier. Nor should we forget all the musicians, the actors and poets who've tried to keep the world spinning in a bonny tune, a laugh, a tear, a heartfelt verse. Nor should we forget those we've sadly lost, should be here now in the warm embrace of friends and family, to toast the sun rising over a new year's horizon. Those who haven't survived this tragic boor, those whose love and will hug forever in their head. So should old acquaintance be forgot? No, they shouldn't. So raise a glass to absent friend, to 2021, a gidgeon with a bit of luck, and see you in 2020, well, for all man's sake. Absent friends, to break new horizons, slang.
Yeah. To
Well done, Jim.
absent friends.
Absent friends.
Yes. Oh, I get a bit teary when I watch that. It's ridiculous. I wrote the blooming thing. So anyway, Henry will always be in our hearts. Now, we're drawing much to a close, but Billy, you're still there. Is there? We've got a 5 minutes or so.
Okay.
Is there anything you'd like to say in
Well,
summary? I've got a bunch of questions, but on you, I think the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, just a couple of other wee links that I haven't got time to get into in detail, but I was delighted when finally, when the new regime come in Russia, they restored the old Russian naval flag, which was the St. Andrew's cross in reverse, the blue cross on a white background, because it was reckoned that it was the Scottish Jacobites at the court of Peter the Great who'd introduced that flag. So it's great to see it being used again. You can see it when you take a boat ride in St. Petersburg. Again, you're a Fitba fan. You don't follow the same team as me, but Paisley Buddies with J&J Coates take Fitba to Moscow. And I've got great stories in the Scottish world about people, like there's a flax dresser from Montrose trying to teach the Russian peasants how to head the ball in a place called Sitchevka. So Fitba was another thing that we gave the Russians. And great influence back here from the time of the revolution, where John Maclean, great John Maclean, has come home to the Clyde, great songs by Hamish Henderson. And the first time I ever come across John Maclean was in Lenin's mausoleum in Red Square, literally going through it, carved in the wall at that time, in the 1960s, was the name Maclean, along with Liebknecht and Rosa Luxemburg, the three consuls that Lenin set up across Europe. And John Maclean was one of them. And later on, I had the pleasure of giving a talk on Scots in Linlithgow, and an old lady come up and thanked me for my work in promoting the Scots language. And as she went away, the organizer says, "Do you know who that is?" I says, "No." He says, "That's Nan Milton, the daughter of the great John Maclean, who came home to the Clyde." So that was a lovely story. Another wee story, maybe to finish off with, that brings it almost up to date, and where Rebecca Wills, the lady who wrote the book about the Jacobites in Russia, she tells a story in my programme about George Robertson, the politician, when the world's politicians were coming to Gleneagles, it was about 10, 15 years ago, and her mum had an antiquarian bookshop in Bridge of Allen, and George Robertson came in and bought a copy of her book about the Scottish Jacobites in Russia. and he got Becky to sign it and dedicate it to Vladimir Putin in Russian. And it was sent away. And to Becky's astonishment, about a couple of months later, she received in the post a signed dedication by Vladimir Putin of his biography dedicated to Becky. So there's a contemporary story maybe to finish off with, that there's a book about Scottish Jacobites in Vladimir Putin's library.
I'm not sure I can follow that one really. Maybe I shouldn't. Billy, thank you. Absolutely been a joy to blether with you tonight. We could talk forever and ever, and there's probably another whole programme that we could do about the influence of Scotland and football around the world. And
yes,
and actually, in front of the cultural and creative links that football and Burns and commerce through the flax, the linen industries, the cotton, the jute industries right around the world, and across to America as well, and the Scotch professors, but that's for another day. Thank you, Billy.
You're very well.
Debra, I'm seeing you there now at last. Thank you very much to Debra Salem for her beautiful songs. Are you there? Oh, you're there. I've seen you now. We've turned into this kind of Chuckle Brothers. We all wave at each other now. I don't know how the Chuckle Brothers translates into Russian, but we all wave at each other. But Debra, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Iain Mackintosh. Iain, thank you, brother. Just slightly older than me, brother. Iona, you're a joy as usual. We'll see you at Hamish Matters, maybe. And who else have we? Ian Jordan and Chloe Mackay, take a bow. The future's safe. Natalia, you and I have got more Scots and Russian and Pushkin, lots more to discuss, but I insist that there is either vodka or wine the next time that we speak. Or maybe both. Meg, would you like to say a few words on behalf of the Friends or whatever? Would you like to? The floor is yours.
To wrap up, yes, if everybody can hear me. This has been a glorious evening. We set out to celebrate 30 years looking back, but I think we've got 30 years looking forward now, because this is the new wave, as Henry said, and as the Provost said, and as Tatyana quite rightly pointed out, it's words, and it's just been a glorious evening of words and companionship and fellowship. When I wrote to Tatyana this morning briefly and sent her the running order, I said that it's very different that we could meet all of us, and I keep looking at the number of participants. We've had more than 50 people here on these screens from all over the world. And I saw that your son was here actually as well, Billy.
Good.
And when I first went to Pskov more than 30 years ago, everything had to be done by telex. And nobody had a telex. You had to go to an office to send a telex. In 30 years, the world has shrunk because we can do anything and everything. And we've had a fantastic companionship this evening. Everybody's been looking at each other and looking at the screens. And I've looked at page 2, page 3. It's been tremendous to see who's here tonight. And I know that Iliyana, she's got her headphones on. She's been listening to it because you're recording it. And for those people who couldn't be here tonight, you'll be able to see it online. And this is the way forward. This is the first of 6 monthly online sessions, Zoom sessions. And we have our friends in Russia to help us with this, because the next one is going to be a month from now, and the theme will be art. So it's all contemporary culture, bringing it all up to date. But tonight we've been looking back as an opportunity to look forward. So thank you everybody for coming along tonight. It's been wonderful.
Thank you. And thank you. I mean, I'm not going to repeat everything you've just said there. I would just like to, on behalf of myself and the performers, thank yourselves, the Friends of Pskov, and across all of the countries for having us and embracing our art. And also to Jennifer and all the Federation of Writers Scotland people that have actually pushed all the buttons in the background and made me sound sensible. It makes a lot of difference. And to the Friends of William Soutar, worth a nod as well.
Yes.
They're all online. All these things are all online. Go and look out, go and seek out the Friends of William Soutar. And if you're not a member, we take memberships from all over the world. And that goes for the Federation of Writers. You would welcome to all join us. So I think that's me. I earned my corn by mentioning them all now, so I'm okay. I'm looking at the chair.
Jim,
Yes.
could I just say thank you to Natalia, who came to our rescue tonight to provide the Zoom for us. So wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yes, wait till you get the bill. That'll be. So I think this is one of these ones where we all now wait to see who's last out the door, isn't it? So
It is. And don't forget, it's Monday here, but it's Tuesday now in Russia. So good night, Svetlana, Tatyana, for joining us so late.
So
Good
we
night,
all
everybody.
do the double wave.
Night.
We all wave.
Thank you.
all.
Bye-bye.
Good night, Ian. Well done, Ian.
Bye.
Bye.
Big thank you to Jim from me personally. Thank you, Jim.
Big thank you to Jim. Big thank you
Thank you to Iliyana for all that organising.
Yes.
Well done.